Harvey Kurtzman ruined my life. He was the creator of the idea behind and the first issues of Mad when it was a comic book. And I discovered it, as I'll be showing people later, in a comic strip version of my traumatic beginnings. Discovered a paperback that had the old Mad Comics issues printed in it when I was like 5 years old or so, maybe 6. And I was with my mother and I wouldn't leave the store without it, no matter what. And I'd never seen anything like it before, because it was doing something that at the time was incredibly new. Basically, it was saying, the media, the whole damn adult world is lying to you, and we here at Mad are part of the media. So that's quite a Zen koan to solve when you're 6 years old or something, barely reading. And that was something that was introducing an antidote to the bland Norman Rockwell 1950s and created our present moment of, I think irony is now fed with the iron that's in milk. And that's really from Mad. And for me, with refugee-fraught parents, genuinely traumatized rather than using the phrase ironically as I just did, Mad was really more than television, because this was like, must have been 1955 or so. Yeah, 54, 55 at the most. So Mad became, like, for me, this acronym of Mom and Dad. It was my guide into the world, and ultimately I ended up learning the parody version before I learned the real version of almost anything. And this was all the work of one cartoonist who was also an editor as well as an artist, a writer as well as an artist, and not just as a satirist, and inventing a very formalized grammar of how comics pages might work and how the beats and rhythms of a comic story might work, but also doing these kind of very humanistic, maybe anti-war, at least humanistic versions of war comics at the height of the Korean War. And some of those are just classics in my medium. So all of this has been a lifetime of appreciating his work and being launched into my own. First, paying back the Mad lessons as my early adult life consisted of never having a real job but working for a bubblegum company and doing things like wacky packages and garbage pail kids that people of a certain age will all go, oh yes, that scarred me. So it was paying back what I had been given. Well, I know my wife is kicking me in the ribs and just saying, like, it's your kids, asshole. So that's probably the right answer. And it's true, I'm very proud of both of them. They're both young adults now, and they seem to have come out well despite being exposed to me. I would say somehow making stuff that helped change my medium's direction, although it's be careful what you wish for, is probably an achievement of some kind that sometimes I'm proud of and sometimes I'm going, oh my God, what have I done? At some point, I made a Faustian deal consciously, which was when a technology or a medium is no longer a mass medium, it then has to become art or die. This is something I learned from reading Marshall McLuhan back in the day. And it seemed that comics were needed that, starting in the 70s and more clearly ever since, that it needed to either get into a new relationship with the culture around it, or people wouldn't be seeing much of interest in the way of comics, and they'd all just be video game designers. And it seems that now there's an amazing kind of homebrew, do-it-yourself version of comics making, and I'm sure it exists in Denver as well as most of the other places I've visited, where it just genuinely is a medium for self-expression. And the danger of that, the reason that it's a Faustian deal, trying to have made stuff that would work that way, to be able to open up the possibilities of bookstores, museums, universities, libraries, all having comics, is that part of the thing that intoxicated me with comics is that they were downright dangerous. They were burned in the 1940s and 50s as causing juvenile delinquency. There were giant auto-da-fe bonfires of comic books arranged by church groups and PTAs. So those were great comics that were being burned. And it's not like I'd like to see everything domesticated. That would be terrible. But there's room for dangerous art and dangerous literature, even in more traditional forms. And I assumed that if the doors could be opened for a different way of comics being seen and read, that would be interesting and useful. And so far it has been, but sometimes I feel like Moses, having brought the people to the promised land but not being allowed to enter or something. It's just so much stuff happening, so much, that I can't keep up with it. And one of the things I always did do was keep up with it. One of the reasons I was interested in comics is it was manageable. It wasn't like being interested in the history of painting or the history of science or things that have 1,000-year and longer pedigrees. This was only 100 or 2 years, unless you start reaching back and saying, well, those cave paintings, they're comics of a kind. And you can say that, but really it's a medium that's was manageable and now has exponentially become something that's very hard for anybody I know, including other artists, publishers, and so on, to really get a handle on, because so much is happening.